Las Vegas was forged from a sacred promise that no matter who you were or where you crawled from, you could arrive here and be crowned a king. It was the city that defied the very concept of sleep, where the liquor flowed freely, the lights burned with eternal defiance, and the party never dared to end. But the empire that took a century of grit to erect was systematically shattered in a mere 6 years. Between the dark years of 2019 and 2025, Las Vegas executed a horrifying act of self-destruction, erasing everything that made it a legend. The raw thrill, the incredible value, and the sacred bond with the people who were its very lifeblood. And this catastrophe wasn't some random act of fate. It was a slow, deliberate poisoning, born from insatiable greed, criminally short-sighted thinking, and a silent, predatory corporate takeover that crept in like a plague while everyone was looking the other way. When the pandemic struck, a tidal wave of pure panic crashed over the Strip. Casinos were fighting for their lives, and that sheer desperation kicked the door wide open for the vultures of Wall Street. Within months, faceless investment firms began a feeding frenzy, devouring the very land beneath the most legendary resorts on Earth. Under the cover of an unnatural darkness, the Strip was being carved up and sold for parts. In this video, we are conducting an autopsy, exposing exactly how this tragedy unfolded, year by agonizing year. From the dizzying, record-shattering peak of 2019 through the bone-chilling silence of 2020 to the fraudulent mirage of a rebound from 2021 to 2023, the years when corporations and private equity sank their filthy, soulless, grasping claws into the heart of our beloved desert oasis. In this expose, I will prove why we may have reached the point of no return, where the Vegas we all knew and loved has finally been put to death. This is the infuriating chronicle of how Las Vegas methodically destroyed itself in just 6 catastrophic years. 2019, the glorious final summit of Old Vegas. Before the betrayal, before it all turned to ash, there was 2019, the last golden year of a fallen empire. The city hit numbers that were simply staggering. Over 42 million visitors descended upon the Strip. The casino floors crackled with electric energy. The bars were a symphony of joyful chaos, and the authentic, untamed magic of Old Vegas was a palpable force. Back then, Vegas actually gave a damn about you. If you gambled a little, they didn't just comp your dinner, they treated you like royalty. A genuine smile at the bartender meant your next drink had a little more conviction. It wasn't about cold, calculating algorithms or invasive apps tracking your every move. It was about human connection. The deals were the stuff of legend. You could find a steak and egg special for $5. 3 powerful drinks for a mere $10 at Ocean's 1. The buffets were overflowing monuments to glorious excess. The rooms were unbelievably affordable, and the Strip was a living, breathing river of humanity from sunrise to sunrise. Vegas in 2019 still had a soul. You could walk down Las Vegas Boulevard and feel that intoxicating collision of tourists, dreamers, hustlers, and entertainers, all chasing the same shimmering mirage. A small piece of the good life. Everyone, from the taxi drivers to the card dealers, could feel it in their bones. The city was on an unstoppable rampage. Visitors were spending freely, shows were sold out for months, and casino profits were soaring to obscene heights. If you lived here, it felt like the boom would never end. But the terrifying truth that no one knew was that 2019 was the edge of the cliff. The deceptive, terrifying calm before the entire world came crashing down. Within months, the roar would be silenced, the lights would be extinguished, and the city that never slept would be forced into an unnatural, silent coma. Vegas didn't know it at the time, but this was the end of everything. The very last year it would ever truly feel like Vegas. Part 2. 2020, the year the music died. If 2019 was the glorious summit, 2020 was the sickening, bone-shattering freefall. Not a slow decline, an instantaneous, horrifying blackout. One week, the Strip was a chaotic masterpiece of life. The next, it was a desolate movie set after the apocalypse. The iconic fountains stopped their dance, frozen in time. The brilliant marquees went blind. The streets that once throbbed with light and laughter devolved into a vast, empty canyon of silence. Even the grizzled locals, the ones who thought they'd seen it all, admitted they'd never witnessed anything so profoundly haunting. Vegas had survived recessions, it had stared down scandals, it had even outlasted mob wars. but it had never, ever stopped breathing. Not until 2020. The lockdown didn't just close casinos, it stopped the city's heart. Tens of thousands of employees, the very soul of the city, were erased overnight. Bartenders, dealers, performers, just gone. Entire resort empires sealed their doors, plagued by the terrifying uncertainty of ever opening again. And for the few who remained, walking the strip felt like a spiritual violation, like standing in the ruins of a great cathedral after the congregation had been vanquished. You could hear the lonely wind howling through the steel canyons that once pulsed with music and money. When the lights finally, hesitantly, flickered back on months later, people cheered, but it was a hollow, desperate sound. Something was fundamentally broken. The city rebooted, yes, but the version that returned was a soulless clone, a ghost of its former self. The shutdown didn't kill Las Vegas, but it inflicted a mortal wound from which it would never recover. Because once you've witnessed the strip go completely dark, you can never look at those lights the same way again. Part 3. 2020 to 2021, the era of the stimulus mirage. When Vegas finally lurched back to life, it wasn't the triumphant comeback everyone prayed for. Oh, the lights were back on, sure. But something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The regular crowd, the loyal gamblers, the couples on anniversaries, the retirees who made the yearly pilgrimage, they were all rightfully wary of returning. But a different, more volatile element descended upon the city instead. A horde of what shell-shocked locals grimly dubbed stimulus tourists, flush with government cash, protected by rent freezes, and boiling over with months of pent-up aggression. They weren't there to savor the experience. They were on a mission. Their purpose was to incinerate that free money with breathtaking speed. For a few nightmarish months, Vegas became a twisted parody of itself, with hotels slashing rates to rock bottom in a desperate bid to fill the void. And with that desperation, an entirely new breed of chaos was unleashed. Ugly, brutal fights erupted nightly on the Strip. Hotel rooms were systematically demolished. Casino security was hopelessly outmatched, fighting a losing battle against the tide of anarchy. If you dare ask anyone who worked through that nightmare, they'll tell you with a haunted look in their eyes that it was the most corrosive crowd the city had ever been forced to endure. People were intoxicated before noon, hurling chips like trash, screaming at beleaguered staff, and demanding privileges that had long since vanished. For a city founded on the illusion of controlled risk, this was absolute, unadulterated bedlam. And while cash was technically flowing, it came at a devastating cost, poisoning the city's very reputation. The energy that pulsed through the city wasn't excitement. It was the raw, frantic stench of desperation. The casinos, the tourists, the employees, everyone was just clawing for a return to normal that would never come. This was the moment the city's soul fractured. Vegas was breathing again, but it was a sick, feverish breath, and the people in charge knew it. Part 4, 2021 to 2022. While the city reeled from the chaos on the streets, a far more sinister and silent coup was unfolding in the boardrooms. For generations, the casinos were the domain of Vegas lifers, people with the desert in their blood who had built the city from the ground up. They understood the ecosystem, the high rollers, the cocktail waitresses, even the locals who'd play the penny slots after a long shift. Vegas was a city built on handshakes and history. But in 2021, that foundation began to crumble as casino empires began liquidating their most valuable assets, the very land they stood on, to faceless, monolithic investment firms. These weren't gamblers. They were vultures who traded in office towers and retirement funds, not gut feelings and royal flushes. The wolves of Wall Street had finally breached the gates of Las Vegas. The strategy was dressed up in sterile corporate language that made it seem harmless. Sell the land, lease it back, business as usual. But these deals were a Trojan horse, carrying a new, relentless kind of pressure, driven by quarterly earnings calls and shareholder demands. Suddenly, the fate of Vegas was no longer in the hands of casino bosses who loved the neon glow. It was being dictated by finance drones in New York who had never even set foot in a sportsbook. Every square inch of the Strip was now a line item on a spreadsheet, forcing forced to justify its own existence. The result was a brutal, cold-hearted purge. The cold, brutal calculus was simple. Anything that didn't bleed profit was executed. Free parking? A relic. Cheap food deals? A fantasy. The legendary comp system was gutted, replaced by cold, calculating algorithms that measured your worth down to the last dollar before deeming you valuable. This was the precise moment Vegas lost its identity and became just another soulless airport terminal, albeit one with slot machines. The corporate era hadn't just begun, it had conquered. And for the first time, the game was no longer about giving people an escape. It was now a cynical experiment to see just how much abuse and extortion a customer would tolerate before finally breaking. Part 5, 2022, the year of so-called revenge tourism. By 2022, after 2 years of confinement, the masses were desperate for any semblance of life, ready to spend whatever it took to feel a pulse again. And no place was better prepared to exploit that desperation than Las Vegas. And so the city roared back to life, a fever dream of packed planes, overflowing casinos, and restaurants booked solid for weeks. They called it revenge travel, a disturbingly accurate term for the reckless spending to come. The price tag became irrelevant. People were hemorrhaging money just to claw back a piece of their stolen time. And Vegas, smelling blood in the water, prepared to feast. Room rates shot into the stratosphere. Resort fees, already a sham, were quietly inflated. The price of a simple drink doubled overnight. Rooms that were a modest $99 in 2019 were now shamelessly priced at $300, and people, in their desperation, paid it. To the corporate overlords, this was a revelation. The public's appetite for exploitation was seemingly bottomless. The higher they pushed the prices, the more eagerly the crowd seemed to pay. The Strip raked in an obscene $11 billion that year, the most in its history, a record built on the back of sheer desperation. But beneath the champagne toasts and record profits, a much darker lesson was being learned. The city was discovering that unbridled predatory greed wasn't just profitable, it was celebrated. You could strip away every last perk, gouge them at every turn, and they would still grin for a selfie under the glowing lights of their own fleecing. Vegas had always been about pushing boundaries. That was its seductive allure. But in 2022, it made a chilling new discovery. The shocking limit of how far you could push a person's wallet before they even noticed they were being played for a fool. That single lesson was a poison pill. From that moment on, the city's entire philosophy twisted, abandoning the question of how do we attract them for a far more sinister one. How much can we bleed from them before they leave? Welcome to Part 6, 2023, the year greed became God. By 2023, any semblance of the old Vegas was dead and buried. The city that built its legend on value had perfected the art of the squeeze, a grotesque masterclass in giving you nothing for everything. Every single transaction was a trap. You weren't just renting a room, you were being charged for the audacity of even being there. Resort fees skyrocketed to obscene levels. Parking fees, once a forgotten relic, were resurrected to punish guests already hemorrhaging hundreds a night. Check in early? Pay up. Need your room cleaned? That'll be extra. God forbid you need to print a boarding pass, that's another shakedown. And the legendary buffets, once the very symbol of Vegas generosity, were now gated, luxury-priced affairs for the elite. A meager breakfast and coffee could set you back $40, while a single bottle of water in your room commanded a staggering $25. The casino overlords spewed corporate jargon to justify this fleecing. Dynamic pricing, market adjustments, a premium experience. But to the people on the ground, it was just naked, shameless greed dressed in blinking neon. The annual pilgrims began to stay home. The locals, who once treated the Strip as their playground, now shunned it like a plague. Even the lifeblood of the city, the gamblers who built this town, began to realize the house no longer just wanted to win at the tables. It wanted to pick your pocket at every other turn. The irony was sickening. Profits soared to record heights, yet the soul of the city had never felt so hollow. The spontaneous laughter, the feeling of letting go, that intoxicating sense of escape, it was all gone. Replaced by a cold, calculating corporate machine that knew your breaking point and pushed you right to the edge. This was the year the mask finally slipped. Vegas stopped pretending to care about fun. It was just business, cold and brutal. Part 7, 2024, The Reckoning. By 2024, the glittering facade of Vegas was cracking, and the ugliness beneath was impossible to hide. The crowds were thinning, the rooms remained outrageously expensive, and that electric magic The promise that anything was possible had vanished. The digital world declared war. TikToks and YouTube exposés went viral, showcasing the absurdity: $25 water, $40 breakfasts, $100 resort fees for nothing. And the final insult? Broken escalators leading to so-called premium entrances. Influential travel vloggers dropped the hammer, their verdict echoing across the internet. Vegas isn't fun anymore. Their posts ignited a firestorm, drawing millions of views from a betrayed public who felt utterly scammed. Even the diehards, the loyalists who made their annual pilgrimage like clockwork, began to cancel. Why endure $1,000 fleecing in Vegas when you could be treated like royalty in Mexico or Miami for a fraction of the cost? The casinos, naturally, remained in deep denial. The spreadsheets looked good. Profits were technically up. But ask the people on the ground, the dealers, the waitresses, and they'd whisper the grim truth. The place felt like a ghost town. Oh, tourists still came, but they were different. The energy was gone. Less laughter, less genuine excitement, a chilling absence of the roar of a big win. And most damning of all, fewer and fewer return visitors. Vegas was transforming into a one-and-done tourist trap, not a cherished destination. That year, the city threw lavish global spectacles, Formula One, massive conventions, and colossal concerts, all in a desperate attempt to scream, "Vegas is back!" But these events only highlighted the city's tragic disconnect from its own soul. Locals were exiled from their own town. Visitors were met with frustration and price gouging, and the very employees felt like nameless extras in a soulless corporate theme park. This backlash wasn't merely about money. This was about a profound and bitter betrayal. The public's rage wasn't because Vegas changed. It was because Vegas had forgotten what made it special. It had amputated its own heart. By the close of 2024, the hashtag Vegas isn't worth it was no longer just a trend. It was a verdict, delivered by millions of jaded former believers. And for the first time in its storied, infamous history, Las Vegas wasn't battling another city for dominance. It was locked in a desperate struggle to reclaim the trust of the very people it had so carelessly cast aside. Part 8, 2025, a city searching for a soul it may have already sold. And so we arrive at 2025, this very moment. The neon still screams, the billboards still promise paradise, and on the surface, the illusion has never been more polished. But take a walk down that famous strip, and you can feel the void. Something vital is gone. The throngs of people are a shadow of their former selves. Yes, the mega conventions and marquee events still pull in temporary tides of humanity, but the weeks in between tell the real, chilling story. Eerily empty walkways, non-existent lines at once packed restaurants, and legions of dealers standing guard over silent, vacant tables. Vegas hasn't fallen silent. It has become hollowed out. The corporate takeover is complete. Virtually every iconic resort is now a portfolio piece, owned or controlled by the same faceless handful of investment behemoths. The deals that once defined this city, sealed in hazy backrooms on the Strip, are now cold calculations made in sterile glass towers a staggering 2,000 miles away. Every square inch of this town has been given a price tag. Every single experience is now ruthlessly optimized for profit. You see the employees smile, but it's a hollow mask. Their hearts are nowhere to be found, as the tourists just keep coming, only to be bled dry, spending more money in less time. And the locals, the very soul of this place, they now avoid the Strip like a plague. Vegas has become a twisted, grotesque paradox. More polished, more obscenely expensive, yet somehow more desolate and empty than it has ever been. The very spirit that made it electric, the magnificent chaos, the raw humanity, that intoxicating feeling that anything could happen, has been surgically replaced by a sanitized, corporate-approved imitation of a dream. What took a century to build was systematically dismantled in just 6 years. The shutdown broke its pulse. Unchecked greed sealed its fate, and the corporate takeover finished the job. Las Vegas didn't die in a flash. It was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts, until it simply forgot what it meant to be alive.